talk about big data. This term's 5 to 10 years old, depending on how cutting edge you are in this world. Um, Maybe longer if you go all the way back. But we're starting to understand where you go from just large data sets to big data. So we'll talk about that a little bit. And the data analytics life cycle, we'll go over that a little bit. All we have the assignment for this week is just a practice paper. So there's no pressure, no points. So we'll see. It's kind of a test as well. If you don't do anything that doesn't result in a grade, um, you won't do very well in the program. So I'm looking for, I'm sure what will be the most successful students will turn in a good paper, even though there's no grade. You'll get substantive feedback and practice with it. Okay, and then we'll conclude. So, big data. Any background, basic description of big data you see is going to focus on the 3 V's. And there is no real definitive line when you go from just large, diverse data to a big data project. There's no cut and dried boundary. So the less you look for that, and just kind of embrace the overall concepts, and don't fixate on the jargon too much, because something will come along. Some author, some company will invent a new buzzword, and oh, this isn't big data. This is huge data or something else. Just like, data mining, data marts, data lakes now, which you see that term. A data lake is just a bunch of garbage thrown in. You have no idea what to do with it. uh, yeah, okay, it's a data lake. Anyway, yeah, terminology. So terminology shifts and changes meaning and goes in and out of vogue. But for right now, in 2020, these are pretty good foundational tenets to talk about big data and how we're shifting into big data analysis, and it requires a different mindset and different tools. Um, Stronger hardware does really well with virtualization and being able to spawn a bunch of different different virtual machines to break down a problem. But anyway, so 3 V's: volume, variety, velocity. Um, the volume, I've got a slide coming up here in a little while. Just the amount of data that we are producing, just in sheer numbers, just where to put it, the storage and retrieval, um, causes huge challenges. And of course, the management. We're not, you don't really talk about management so much as in analysis, but there's a huge data management issue out there, for how to properly assign metadata, and how to store all of this data so that it can be retrieved and eventually um, utilized. But we'll go into that more in the data science cycle. And then the variety of data. Um, you've got new emerging data exchange formats. Um, in the EDI world, you've got XML and JSON strings, and uh, dynamically generated HTML, and you got video and audio sensors out there, environmental sensors. um, uh, images. Just and if you think about it, if you could look at every photo ever taken on any cell phone and look around the picture and analyze, where are they? When was it? What was the weather like? What products are in there? What are they wearing? Are they smiling? Who else is in the background? Um, there's just a staggering variety of different types of data, and the the machines. You've got digital assistants like Alexa in people's houses. Everybody's carrying a cell phone. You've got, I don't know, somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 billion smartphones on the planet. Um, you've got sensors and drones, video cameras, traffic cameras, dash cams. You've got police wearing body cameras. Um, Financial transactions. Everybody's swiping and beeping and clicking and they're through their digital life cycle and buying things online, and the delivery trucks are out and about and tracking data, millions of packages every day going through the post office and the shipping companies. There's just a huge variety of the formats of all this data. It's in different formats. You got textual documents, emails, unstructured. But we'll go into the varieties of data. But these are just um, what what is separating good old fashioned business data from big data, and then the velocity, the speed of things changing, and the speed at which data is coming at you that could affect a business decision. A lot of this discussion of big data is in the forms of commerce, of business, which to me is limiting because there's a lot of other areas. But um, our primary textbook that the university sent me, data science and big data analytics, frames it a lot in business. Um, Owes to me less so, but yeah, velocity. This data is coming at you in the form, of social media posts that can be, mined for sentiment analysis and location data, that can be used for, advertising or emergency services or, governance decisions. Um, uh, so yeah, the three V's: volume, variety, and velocity. These factors generally are what the authors and experts are showing the difference between big data and just conventional large data. Um, like for instance, when was IBM's Watson able to beat Ken Jennings? That was what, maybe 10 years ago. Um, some people would call that an artificial intelligence. Some assigned it, we're calling it a big data project. I didn't really see it as either one of those. I saw it as conventional text mining, natural language processing. They just read in huge volumes of text and associated keywords closely together with some natural language processing. So the Watson knows the difference between a noun, a verb, and an adjective, and adverb and whatnot, parts of speech, and then computing power, just raw computing power. So when Watson would see keywords, it would quickly associate other keywords that were associated with that. It didn't know what it was doing, and it there was no real time data coming in to Watson, um, which would have made it a big data thing. But anyway, but I digress. Those are your three V's for big data. Um, Volume, I can remember somebody ordering a gigabyte hard drive. This was early 90s. This guy ordered a 1 gigabyte hard drive in say 1991, and I was like, "What are you doing? You're never going to fill up a gigabyte." Oh, and now it's nothing. So the the movement of measuring large volumes of data, we are moving into where exabytes are being discussed. These are 1,000 gigabytes. It's a terabyte, 1,000 terabytes, petabyte, 1,000 petabytes, exabyte. Um, we're well past terabytes. Everybody's got, how many terabyte hard drive on your computer, terabyte plus data size, which is a lot of raw data. If you had a terabyte of, like, a CSV file or an Excel file that was just text, uh, that's uh, pages and pages. I wish I'd have looked that up. Um, uh, we In my former military career, we retrieved somewhere on the order of 47 terabytes of unstructured file stores, just network uh, shared drives full of um, operational information from Iraq. And at that time, somebody looked it up. 47 terabytes was enough pages of text to go to the moon and back. And that was just what we pulled from one organization when the conflict in Iraq ended. Um, when we're going, 47 terabytes, that's really not that drastic of a bit of information until you go to start processing it. And then it does quickly become that. So yeah, and this volume is being uh, caused by all these different generators, as we said, mobile devices, um, the billions of social media users, um, and the data they generate isn't just their posts, just what they are looking at, and the pages you go to. You don't even have to react to it for it to generate data. And then you got, IoT devices, personal assistants, and garage door openers, and smart houses, and personal area networks with, wearable devices. You got a camera, in everyone's pocket. Plus, as we talked about, the government owned and privately owned cameras for, security and monitoring. And then you've got all this healthcare data, these, diagnostic imaging and sensors that are being attached to people and recording volumes of data just for that. Um, that can all be aggregated and used in, data science projects. So yeah, the volume is enormous. And then this last bullet, of course, Moore's law, what storage gets cheaper and cheaper, and processing power gets faster and faster. Then you've got, cloud computing, so that you can, if you need to create a temporary workspace um, that is large, you can, without having to invest in that infrastructure that just sits there after the project. So you could instantiate a very large uh, big data collection in the cloud, analyze it using, the the elastic cloud resources, and then find your answer, and then collapse the whole thing down and quit paying for it. Um, so yeah, between those and then there's, they're always looking at next generation storage, where it's not just a one or a zero, burned on a magnetic platter. That's getting to be fairly passe. So we're looking at all kinds of different encoding mechanisms. So we've got room for all this data, amazingly, but it is still a challenge, both from the cost of storage and determining how long to keep it for, and how to make it retrievable, how to assign, um, meaning to it so that it can be pulled in and assimilated with other data, however it might relate. That starts to your big data management plan can be really complex. All right, so that's big data characteristics, volume, variety. Um, so um, working from the top down, you've got your traditional data, flat files, CSV files that you can download from any number of government research, government sites. Your typical survey data or um, financial flat uh, data that can be analyzed for each column, can have descriptive statistics applied to it. That's the good old fashioned stuff. And normalized relational data, where no kidding, you can use SQL to pull out a um, an answer from a data mart. And then you've got semi-structured, which to me these my Wiley book described XML as semi-structured. But you've got these um, semi-structured sources that can be pulled in and discerned of what they mean and what value they would add to a project. And then quasi-structured was the structured and semi-structured data that might have gaps or voids that need to be dealt with. Um, so basically, what you would a data cleansing or data wrangling effort would fix that up. And then unstructured data, which depending on how you look at it, an email has structure. A document has structure, but they call it unstructured because it's not like, no kidding, data. But it's, a document has structure. It's got a language that it adheres to, which can be mined if you have the right, approach and software and everything. But anyway, that's what unstructured data is now documents and images. And that's where you start to get problems with management is the amounts of all of this stuff floating around, um, assigning metadata and authenticity and then using it. Like I said, the Google Street View car versus all of these other cameras that we all take images of. How do you use it? That we've got digital imaging, image recognition and software, but um, it's just too much. And then again, you have to assign ownership. There's issues with privacy, massive issues with privacy. So there you go. There's variety, variety and format. That's what the form of the data. And then velocity coming at you in real time, and the amount of data not only is coming at you quickly, but it's changing in its volume. It's increasing in its volume, and it's increasing in its variety quickly. So these are some of the issues that compose that. So these three V's are all tightly linked and tightly related, but yet separate terms. And then I have another graphic here that's one day. I found this. I think it actually comes from Visual Capitalist, but it was posted on a World Economic Forum. Anyway, started looking around for a decent graphic that talked about the amount of data. This one is fueled by IoT and the use of connected devices, looked at in the context of one day. So yeah, by 2025, 463 exabytes will be created every day um, yeah, 3.5 billion Google searches. Each one of those is a piece of data, and who did it, what they searched for, who searched, and what was returned. That all has to be stored because it could change tomorrow. Um, so yeah, you gotta store everything. Take a snapshot of everything. 4 petabytes of Facebook every day. So 4,000 terabyte. So anyway, there you go. There's a day in the life of so up there you go. And there's a scale above exabyte. I couldn't have told you if I hadn't looked. Zettabyte, that's what it is. And then a yottabyte. And off we go. Um, there you go. I think uh, are we going to move from IP version 6 and abandon that and go to IP version 8 or something because there's just still too much stuff? We need too many addresses. This is crazy. The growth um, for an old guy like me. Anyway, there you go. A day in the life. The data being generated. Um, so the second chapter of my Wiley book, Data Science and Big Data Analytics, goes into the data analytics lifecycle. And the Ozemir text of Principles of Data Science talks about the data science cycle. They're all the same, and it's very close to a software development. Um, to me, all of these cyclical developmental models are very similar. Um, but in the data analytics lifecycle, the first step is to assemble some sort of team with different roles, and these can overlap. But one thing I want to make sure everybody has firmly loaded in their minds is that every data science project starts with a question. Um, they will in the text we'll talk about framing the problem, but that's asking a question, really. So don't let the data. Oh, I've got this data. What let's use it. Think of what your problem is. Why what's your problem, and what kind of questions and Ozemir talks about pose. First step is to pose an interesting question, and that question might be what entices consumers to buy. What entices a consumer to go out to a restaurant. Um, you know what web page format holds people's eyes the longest. I mean, there's just any number of questions. What medicine is most effective against a certain disease. There's any number of questions. The sky's the limit. But every project starts with a question. Just like your dissertation, your research project will start with a question, a research question. You can Google what is a research question, and there's just there are thousands of descriptions and links. But if you don't have a draft research question for your own dissertation, you might want to get on it because this program goes a lot faster than you might think. So the data analytics lifecycle, we're identifying people. So the business user is the person that has domain knowledge in what they're doing, and will be able to guide the rest of the team in that domain, and what are key problems, key areas for improvement, potential areas for improvement. And potential sources of data and types of data. The project sponsor is more like a management, somebody that might be able to advocate for resources to complete the project. Project managers, just like any other software development effort or construction effort, anything. Manager manages resources, timelines, and overall flow of the project. Um, uh, BI analyst is business intelligence is working with historical data, where data science tries to look into the future and project and discover new knowledge. But you've got to start somewhere, and that's with historical data. A DBA, database administrator, is really somebody more that deals with user roles and the structure of the data in their database. Data engineers more about tuning performance. One of you is a data engineer, so um, that would be great. I hope you folks that are working in data science in all of its different flavors really contribute this class. Not just the minimum to get by, but really think about sharing your knowledge and mentoring the rest of us by sharing what you know. And then finally, your data scientist is um, making sure that the right scientific methodology is being applied, helping with model selection, or at least the analytical approach, um, that developing hypotheses that can be either supported or rejected based on the data. So that's the data scientist brings in the scientific method uh, as far as that's concerned, and then these are the actual steps. Again, these steps are coming directly out of um, my Wiley data science and big data analytics, discovering, analyzing, visualizing, and presenting data. But Ozdemir has a 5-step data science cycle. They're all very similar. Uh, Discovery is where um, you you look at what data you have because you formulate your question. You figure out what your problem is and what questions you are going to ask, that once you have the answer, you can then take action. And then data prep is just pulling together the data that's going to support the project, and making sure it's accessible, formatted appropriately so that the whatever tool, whatever model you're using can make sense of it. And then you do model planning, and then in this textbook, a model is really just an abstraction of reality. It could be a statistical model. It could be an actual model, like an aircraft simulator is a model of a real aircraft. You've got weather models that you feed in all sorts of different types of data. There are models that have been developed for governance where you feed in data of populations and income levels and education levels and numbers of schools and law enforcement and population densities and all of that, and you feed all of this data into a model, and it answers questions for government. If you have had ITS832, you have an entire book on um, using data to form public policy, and some of the articles in that textbook um, were computer models to model things like uh, taxing people, generating revenue, those sorts of things. Okay, so then you build the model, which is actually bringing it up and then inserting the data. Step 5 is critical, because if you can't communicate the results, um, it it's pointless. It's like lighting a candle and hiding it under a basket. It serves no purpose. So communicating clearly, and that's why I'm probably going to make you angry with how much I worry about writing clearly in this course. But if you think about it, um, if you can't write clearly, all the rest of this is pointless. Um, so if that's a, a critical success factor, then I can't ignore it. But and then we operationalize. Hopefully we're not doing a data science project just because. There may be some what you would call pure science, pure research, which is just finding things out for the sake of finding them out. You don't even really need to have a purpose. There may be some of that going on in big data, I'm sure. But for our purposes, um, where for a PhD IT program, we're going to operationalize those answers and make sure that we are contributing. We, as information technology professionals and data science professionals, we are um, making a measurable impact to our organization, and that's what operationalizing means. Okay, so here's this graphic. Yeah, that's fantastic. Okay, so that was the data analytics life cycle. So the assignment this week is no points. So hopefully you won't see any pressure um, to to try and turn in something that you hope makes you sound smart. I see a lot of students, including in class discussion, turning in stuff that just sounds kind of like a lecture. And I had one student last year tell me that I'm just trying to write at the level of a PhD. And well, the, writing correctly is important. Um, that's a good goal, but trying to impress people with your expertise uh, when you don't have it is kind of silly. You understand? I'm not looking for you guys to mimic an academic article or feel the pressure to mimic someone else's writing. I want you to write accurately and correctly, um, but I want to make sure it's informative and original, and you're walking me through your train of thought as you write. And I've already seen it somewhat this week where you know folks are not addressing the instructions and they're just throwing out some keywords, buzzwords that try and sound kind of like what they think the topic is. Uh, Watch my video, Academic Writing for Software Engineers. I can see who's watched it and who hasn't. I have statistics tracking for that. Go back and watch that if you haven't watched it and internalize it. Okay, so this week there's an article to analyze. They use a framework for ingesting data into basically a model, kind of like last week, where it's not particularly well defined. Although at least this time there's a graphic, and you can kind of see how we're feeding public and individual citizenry data in there for sentiment analysis for um, on social media, but we're also feeding in event calendars and public sensors in in order to run a city more intelligently. So that's what this week's practice paper's on is big data and city planning. I changed the instructions from what you may have seen if you're trolling the internet looking for answers to ITS 836 questions. This assignment is not uh, the same as what you'll see out there, and it's slightly modified. I'm getting away um, from the model they mentioned in the book um, or in the article, and I'm opening it up more generically to um, city planning, big data and city planning and smart cities. So that's the practice assignment. I gave you a couple of key how are they using big data, and what sort of solutions is it providing? So this is just a story. This is just an academic paper where you are telling me about big data projects that are being used to shape the way urban planners and managers are acting, and what effect it has on the leadership and the citizenry. 3 to 5 pages. I recommend 3 pages. If it's only two, again, this is just for getting feedback from me. So the whole purpose of this assignment is practice. So I hope you will. One thing I'm noticing in class discussion is the random placement of references that don't support what you're saying. But it sure looks like you got something there, right? You stick a citation in there. Hey, well, that's just being a little silly, okay, guys? So make sure the bottom line of your paper supports your point. You understand that? Just because some author mentioned some keyword doesn't make it an appropriate reference. When you're making a point and backing it up with a reference, the reference needs to have made some sort of bottom line contribution or finding that you are saying, okay, citizens are happier. So this is just an example. Citizens are happier in a smart city that its leaders are using, where its leaders are using big data uh, to form governance. So somebody would have had to back that statement up. You would find an article where someone had polled citizens of a city that was using big data to support the operation of that city. And the smarter the city, the happier the people, or something like that. So that needs to be the bottom line of an article when you do references. I can provide more if I'm confusing you about how to cite a reference and the appropriate way to cite references. Please shoot me an email, and I can discuss it at length. Okay, so that's your topics of the week and your assignments. Your assignment. There is one additional supplemental video I wanted you to watch in the week 2 content area, and it's about an experimental drone being developed for the U.S. government, or that was under a contract by BAE. That to me typifies the big data challenge. This drone could be built relatively inexpensively because they're using commercially available off-the-shelf components. It's actually a pod that can attach to any aerial platform, but it uses reuses inexpensive COTS hardware. But watch it. This thing generates an exabyte of data a day. And we could have thousands of these things airborne watching everything. And it could be used for more than just, managing a city or tracking criminals or crowds or traffic jams or responding to natural or man-made disasters. There's a lot of uses for, persistent wide area surveillance. It could be used for tracking, herds of land animals or flocks of migrating fish or schools of fish or flocks of birds. And there's just any number of things that something like this could be used for. But it presents a data challenge. It presents a privacy challenge, storage, use. How do you make use of all this data? What do you do with it all? How long do you keep it? So it's like 5 minutes. It talks about Argus, a drone being developed by um, uh, DARPA, by BAE under contract at DARPA. Um, but if you want to watch that whole special, it was called Rise of the Drones. You can find it on YouTube. Nova, the PBS special, Nova Rise of the Drones. So make sure you watch that 5 minute video. It'll give you some good background perspective. All right, guys. In conclusion, we're going to run into all kinds of overlapping terms in data science, big data analytics, stats, business intelligence, data mining, machine learning, data marts. So it all relates and overlaps and everything. So we'll try and add clarity to that as we move through. When writing this week, focus on the instructions. This isn't just a background paper on what big data is. Okay, that's not what it is. It's not even a background paper on what a smart city is, right? I asked you for two things. I even put them in bold in the instructions. So try and make sure that you're providing examples of projects that address the instructions. And if you have any questions or concerns, feel free to email me. I check my email twice a day, and I'm pretty good at responding. But you gotta ask the question if you want the answer. Okay. Have a good week, guys. We'll see you in the classroom.
Their master's degree where you just, you survive your coursework, you get, a passing grade each term, and then before you know it, you've endured the program long enough that you get the degree. But the PhD is not like that. The dissertation requirement is ominous. So understanding the basis of what you're doing and your research project and choosing your research project and defining it and doing your literature review and all of those things that you have to do in your 120 page dissertation. It's never too early to get started thinking about that sort of stuff. So make sure I cover all of that in my 1 hour lecture. I know you probably would love it if I did a 10-minute lecture, but the university wants me to keep it closer to an hour. Okay, so healthcare analytics. This is just in general before we talk about the challenges and whatnot. I've been teaching courses for a few years that have brought in the topic of healthcare and healthcare informatics and the data that can be mined out of electronic health records, compared to midway through the last century, whatever, 30 years ago, maybe even less than that. Gathering healthcare data was arduous because everything was just written down on paper. Everything was written down on paper. Your diagnosis, the questionnaire of your symptoms, and your whether or not you've ever had this disease or that disease, or if you are a cancer survivor, or all of those questions that they ask you when you go to the doctor's office are on paper. A lot of it still is. I'm dismayed sometimes at the amount of data I provide on paper, and even if it is eventually transcribed, there's always a possibility for transcription errors. So, electronic health records, I think, was one of the to me the key initiatives, and we're still really taking baby steps, especially if you think globally, teeny tiny baby steps towards electronic health records that are standardized, and there's data checking to make sure that everything is complete and accurate. and shareable. So yeah, electronic health records. Uh, once it's digital, if it goes in digital, that takes away a step from like a medical transcriptionist um, typing in information or transcribing information from a questionnaire form or from a lab result, anything like that. Once it gets combined into a structured, mature um, repository like EHR, then um, you can have a standard for data exchange where EHR's moving towards where we measure everything in the same unit. There's similar units of measure and data types and data elements. And that allows you to share information. Once you get that data flowing, then you can turn that data into information between practitioners, between hospital systems, between countries. So that's EHR kind of documents. EHR documents the past, really, which is good. You know, you can do some level of um, retrospective and predictive data analysis with that, with all those records, assuming they're accurate and complete, and all of the which we'll talk about in the challenges section. But one thing I'm kind of interested in that I'm not really seeing, and this watching the news during this pandemic is kind of highlighted. You know, we see in you know most of the world, folks laying in hospitals attached to patient monitoring systems. And those patient monitoring systems are providing real time, cardiovascular information. And again, I am a doctor. I'm not a medical doctor. Um, so there are many factors. Most of it's cardiopulmonary effectiveness, blood oxygen level, heart rate, respiration. But there's a lot of temperature. There are many things that real-time patient monitoring systems can monitor. Historically, we use those for telemedicine. Most of the applications that I see of real-time patient monitoring is so that you can keep track of someone remotely while they're at home through internet-connected, Internet of Things, wearable sensors, and even if it's not real time, you can download. Like my mother-in-law wears a pacemaker that has a sensor she puts over it, and it sends the information to her cardiologist, and that's not necessarily real time, but it is remote patient monitoring. But this is mostly used so that you don't have to go into the hospital or you don't have to stay in the hospital while you're being monitored, but it provides the same level of data collection and the same level of monitoring. Whereas if something started going wrong with cardiac arrhythmia or whatever, they could potentially respond with an ambulance call. But I was just thinking, if you could link all of these people together that are in the hospital with COVID-19, and you could provide patient demographics and lab work as it becomes available, and patient history. So you'd have their age and their sex and previous illnesses and pre-existing conditions, whether they were heart patients or if they had diabetes. You if you could share all of this information in real time, whether or not they had been given a drug trial. We've been trying a lot of different approaches for treatments that may and may not show a response. So I'm just wondering what a great big data project that would be, because there's a real-time component in big data analysis where um, you can adapt those volumes of information coming in from thousands upon thousands of patients across the world, um, and see what is happening in real time. You could see the effectiveness of certain therapies. You could see the patients getting better, their blood oxygen level getting better, whether or not they're intubated, um, would 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 be shown globally. I'm just thinking, if in a perfect world, if you could monitor all the data that we can collect from folks in hospitals, um, I just think it would be a very interesting big data, and we will get there eventually at some point, where that sort of real time data is being shared in a giant network, especially as a reaction to a pandemic like this. I think COVID-19 hit at a time in history when we have the capability of truly changing the way we look at things. We've all seen contact tracing using our smartphones. I apologize. I'm still having a cup of coffee. Yeah, contact tracing with smartphones, and who was in what country, when, and where, and we're getting to be where we can you can put all that data together into a big data project, and truly get some answers. I'm really expecting some fairly major changes in healthcare research and public policy. But we'll see. Time will tell. But healthcare analytics brings, and its underlying data brings in privacy concerns, which has been documented thoroughly. Again, remember, I use Google Scholar as my first source. I don't use the university library first, because I've got 3 university subscriptions, and they all have different databases that they subscribe to. I like Google Scholar. It seems to be the keyword searching seems to be smarter, and it comes with an easy citation tool. You can download the citation to your bibliographic software, and if the article is something you want to keep, you can often download the full source, full text version. So I'm a big Google Scholar fan. But if you look, privacy concerns in healthcare data have been documented thoroughly. Some of you are in this line of work, and you know all about HIPAA and compartmentalizing information, and the security of it. And big. I have a colleague who accidentally accessed patient records. He was a hospital administrator, not a provider, and he thought he was helping with something, and he accessed patient data in the performance of his duties. But HIPAA is so tight that he was basically given the option to resign. I've never worked in that world, and I got to tell you, it's a little intimidating. Um, the chance, to have your employment terminated because you were trying to do the right thing, but you did it the wrong way. That's a big concern. So, and then, a lot of folks have, we've seen in the popular press concerns with the ethical use of healthcare analytic data. And that's by both, genetic predisposition, and I would say, and I didn't put it here on the slide, but lifestyle choices. Whether or not you were ever a smoker or used a vape pen, if that gets documented in your EHR and then gets held against you later, is that ethical? Apparently insurance companies are looking at these sorts of things and deciding how much you're going to pay for life insurance and health insurance. Some companies are apparently willing to look at your health history and make hiring decisions based on pre-existing conditions and potentially chronic health issues. Do you have a right to keep that private, um, or not? Or is it all of our right to know who amongst us is whatever, HIV positive or COVID positive, or you know what I mean? So there's a lot of ethical debate between the rights of the individual and the rights of the greater society, or the need of the greater society. So lots of challenges there. So yeah, healthcare analytics, and big data. We've got 3 articles here. I'll go into those a little bit more in depth when we talk about the discussion question. But I want to pop out of this, stop that share, and share my Chrome. Probably ought to share my whole screen and go to out of slideshow mode. Come on now, get out of slideshow mode. There we go. Go to Chrome. I wanted to just look at some of these stats. One thing is a website you might enjoy if you haven't been to it before. It's ourworldindata.org, and it shows some fundamental data visualization, and of course the topic du jour is coronavirus. So you can filter this data set, much like you would maybe like a Tableau or a Power BI display. You can look at, let's see, this is total cases per capita. So I checked per capita because the raw numbers don't tell the tale. But like the U.S. per capita is way up here, especially compared to some other industrial nations like South Korea, Australia. So anyway, and then if you look at like the number of this is tests, yeah. If you look at confirmed cases, per capita again, U.S. is really high, and then down here you've got India way down at the bottom, South Korea and Australia, fewer confirmed cases, and they're being touted now. Their response is being touted. But this is the data. But what I think would be interesting is just peeling the onion, as it's called. If you're exploring and a data scientist, you're asking further questions. Okay, well, this is the data shows this to be a fact. Then you have to look at other factors, causation. So is South Korea so low because of the way they responded? Is it cultural? Is it their age demographic? Italy has a very old average age, and they were decimated. So there's all these different factors that could relate, correlate, as we know from statistics. They could correlate, but they don't necessarily show causation. So you really got to dig deep and do some analysis on this sort of stuff. But I thought you guys might enjoy this. Our world in data, and then there's also caveats to the data. I'll go back to the number of tests. That seems to be where the data gets the dirtiest, where you can't Spain's got tests performed. Australia, the units of the test are unclear. the U.S. has inconsistent units, and they list the actual project where they're getting their data. But then look down here, the note. It explains the data and the limitations of the data. And any research project that you write up will have a limitations section, including your dissertation. You as a researcher, you have to be open and honest and transparent about the limitations of your study. So for this being just a, not necessarily a study, but more just a visualization of the data that exists as we know it. There are substantial differences across countries in terms of the units, whether or not all the labs are included, the extent to which negative and pending tests are included, and other aspects. Details for each country can be found further, so you can dig deeper and deeper and deeper into the data. So anyway, I thought that was an interesting exercise. And then there was another tab or two. Oh yeah, the CDC. So if you're getting getting data, from the reliable source, that's the other things. Try not to, you can conduct all of this yourself. They will often give you the data set. But this visualization just shows the rate of hospitalization by age. And we've known that way back. The average age of a corona fatality in a study they did in, I think it was 30,000 fatalities in Italy back in March. The average age was 79 years and some months. Average age of the deceased, 79 years. So you could just, do the math. But it was really, really decimating for older populations. So no, I mean, just surfing around in the world of data, you can find data sets that you could pop into your favorite software, whether it's visualization or R or Python. It's just start kind of goofing around with the data. If you're not in that world, it's a great big growth career field. Okay, well, I'll go back to the slides now. We'll talk about this week's. There's 3 articles in the discussions. So sharing my screen still. I'll put it back in slideshow. Okay, so this week's discussion, pretty straightforward. There's 3 articles in there. One of them is particularly aligned with these 4 categories. They basically created these categories in that first article that's listed in your resources for the week 3 resources. But you'll see in many big data projects, these are all similar. So if you want to, maybe if you're reading about a big data project that shows an example of one of these 4 or more categories of challenges, please, you're welcome to share that. But use a header so that we see in your discussion the challenges in data gathering, and then tell us what you saw about that. But